She thought she had the perfect setup, an insult cleverly wrapped in a joke. But in mere seconds, Trump flipped the script, leaving her scrambling to recover. On live TV, the scene was set, a brightly lit studio in Los Angeles, packed with an eager audience craving a spectacle. The cameras rolled, the tension thick, though not a single word had been spoken yet. Seated at the glossy, oversized interview desk was Donald Trump, his posture relaxed, his expression unreadable. Directly across from him sat Lindsay Moore, a liberal talk show host famous for her sharp tongue and relentless jabs at conservative figures. Moments like these had built her career, baiting, provoking, watching her guests sweat under the pressure of her questions. And tonight, she had something special planned. The crowd murmured with anticipation, shifting in their seats. They expected controversy. They expected fireworks. Trump's interviews were never dull, and Moore knew exactly how to turn up the heat. The second the cameras went live, she was on the attack. "Mr. Trump, thank you for being here," she said, flashing a saccharine smile, her voice dripping with forced politeness. Trump gave a slight nod, his hands folded neatly in front of him. "My pleasure, Lindsay. Let's see if you can keep up." A few chuckles rippled through the audience, but Moore didn't even flinch. This was her arena. She thrived in moments like these. If anything, she welcomed the challenge. The first few minutes played out as expected. Politics, policy, the usual back and forth. Moore took. Trump deflected her shots with ease, swatting them away effortlessly. The audience seemed amused, but they were waiting for something bigger, something personal. And more. She was just about to deliver exactly that. Shifting in her chair, she casually tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, as if preparing to drop a bomb. Then, with an air of nonchalance, she leaned in, her eyes gleaming with something just shy of malice. And then, she asked the question. But what she didn't know. She had no idea what was coming next. For a split second, the entire room froze. The air grew heavier, like the temperature had just shifted. The audience, once murmuring, chuckling, fell completely silent. Even the camera operators, trained to remain detached, seemed to hesitate. Lindsay Moore kept her smirk, but something in her posture betrayed her. She had crossed a line, and she knew it. The words still hung in the air, bold and unapologetic. "Have you ever thought about cheating on Melania? Because let's be honest, she's kind of outdated." A low blow, delivered without so much as a flinch, disguised as a joke, but the intent was unmistakable. She wasn't just poking for a reaction. She was baiting him, daring him to stumble in front of millions of viewers. The audience didn't quite know how to respond. Some chuckled nervously, others exchanged wide-eyed glances. Even those who weren't Trump supporters could see it. This wasn't a political jab. It was personal. It was cruel. And for the first time that evening, Trump didn't reply right away. He just stared, not at Moore, not at the audience, but at the desk in front of him, fingers tapping lightly against the surface. It was subtle, but the tension in the room, unbearable. Lindsay shifted in her seat, clearly thrown off. She hadn't expected silence. She had expected an outburst, maybe a dismissive wave, perhaps even a crude joke in return. But this was different. Then, slowly, Trump lifted his head. His expression, impossible to read, amusement, disbelief, and something sharper all mixed together. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady. "Let me get this straight," he said, pausing just long enough for the weight of his words to sink in. "You're sitting there, on national television, calling my wife, the former First Lady of the United States, outdated?" The word lingered, sharp as a blade. Somewhere in the crowd, someone muttered, Damn. Lindsay offered a half-hearted shrug, clearly trying to keep her composure. Oh, come on, Donald, she forced a laugh. It's just a question. Lighten up. Trump leaned in slightly, locking eyes with her. It's not a question, Lindsay. It's an insult. But let's pretend for a second that you actually meant it as a real question. The smirk on her face wavered. Trump gestured toward the audience. Imagine if I flipped it around. Imagine I was sitting here with a married female politician, a Democrat, of course, and I asked her, "Hey, have you ever thought about cheating on your husband? Because, let's be honest, he's kind of outdated." A ripple of murmurs spread through the audience. Some nodded, others sat up a little straighter. Trump let that thought hang in the air before continuing. You'd have CNN running a special on me before I even left this building. The headlines would be screaming, calling me a misogynist. And you? You'd be leading the charge, wouldn't you? Lindsay opened her mouth, but no words came out. Trump, though, he wasn't finished. For the first time in the interview, Lindsay Moore blinked, hesitated. She looked unsure. The room, no longer under her control. The audience, which had started out leaning in her favor, was shifting, not necessarily toward Trump, but away from her. Leaning back in his chair, Trump looked relaxed, his expression unreadable. But when he spoke again, there was an edge to his voice. Let's talk about outdated. The word had been hers. But now, it belonged to him. He clasped his hands together, his tone steady. Melania Trump speaks 5 languages. She's a successful businesswoman. She was the First Lady of the United States. And you, someone who claims to champion feminism, to stand for women's empowerment, sit here and try to reduce her worth to an expiration date. Lindsay shifted, forcing a small smirk. Oh, come on, Donald. It was just a joke. Trump tilted his head. A joke? Well, let me ask you something. Lindsay, do you have an expiration date? The smirk vanished. The audience let out a sound, a mix of a gasp and a murmur. Lindsay's fingers twitched slightly against the table. She was calculating, scrambling for a way to spin this back in her favor. Trump didn't wait. You want to talk about outdated like it's some kind of punchline? Let's be real. If a conservative man sat in this chair and called Michelle Obama outdated, you'd be calling for his career, his job, his head on a plate. A flicker of something crossed Lindsay's face. She knew he wasn't wrong. But Trump still wasn't done. You know what's actually outdated, Lindsay? He gestured vaguely around the set. This tired, lazy, recycled strategy, humiliating conservative figures by attacking their wives, their families, their marriages. When you can't take me down, you go after the people around me. Lindsay shook her head, letting out a light laugh. Oh, please, Donald. But Trump cut in, his tone sharper. Did you ask Joe Biden if he's ever thought about cheating on Jill? No, you didn't. Did you ask Barack Obama if he ever thought about cheating on Michelle? No, you didn't. Because you know it's disgusting. You know it's low. But when it's me, suddenly, it's just a joke. Silence. Even the crew members behind the cameras had stopped moving. Lindsay's jaw was tight. She wasn't used to losing control. But Trump, he wasn't just defending himself. He was flipping the entire script. He shook his head, exhaling. You know, Lindsay, for years you guys have screamed about feminism, about women's rights, about respect. And yet, the first chance you get, you sit here and mock a woman, my wife, simply because she's over 50? Another shift in the audience. People were rethinking. Trump let out a chuckle, but it wasn't amusement. It was disbelief. So tell me, Lindsay, when exactly does a woman become outdated in your eyes? What's the cutoff? 45? 50? Should we just start retiring women from relevance once they hit menopause? Lindsay had nothing. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. The audience? No longer on her side. She had thrown a punch, expecting Trump to stumble. Instead, she had just given him the moment of the night. But the fallout? It was just beginning. Sitting up straighter, Lindsay pushed back against the heavy silence settling over the studio. She was scrambling, desperately trying to regain control of the conversation before it slipped completely out of her hands. A forced laugh. "Oh, Donald, you're being dramatic. It was just a little fun, a little." Trump cut in, shaking his head. "No, Lindsay, it wasn't. And you know it." His tone remained steady, controlled, but firm, like a man who had seen this game played more times than he could count. "If it was just a little fun, Lindsay, you wouldn't be squirming in your seat right now." The audience felt it. The shift. The power in the room had flipped, and everyone knew it. Lindsay tried to push forward, a quick glance toward the crowd, as if searching for support. "I think we're getting a little off track here. I was just making an observation. Melania is beautiful, of course, but let's be real. Most men in your position tend to, go younger." Trump smirked. "And there it is." Lindsay hesitated. "There what?" Trump leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on the desk. "That little trick you all love to use. You insult someone, you mock them, and the second you get called out, you hide behind, 'Oh, I was just making an observation.'" His voice sharpened. "No, Lindsay. You were trying to humiliate my wife." Lindsay opened her mouth, but Trump wasn't finished. "And since we're talking about appearances, about outdated people, let me ask you something." He gestured toward her. "You're what, mid-40s?" A sharp inhale. Lindsay's eyes flashed. She forced a smile, but it didn't look natural. "Why does that matter?" Trump shrugged. "I'm just making an observation." The audience erupted. Some laughed, some gasped, and others? They just watched, stunned. Because this was not the interview they had expected. Lindsay's face darkened. "That's different." Trump's voice remained calm, calculated. "Why?" Lindsay faltered. "Because now it's about you." She stammered. She was losing, and she knew it. Trump pressed on. "You want to sit there and talk about outdated women, but the second I flip it back on you, suddenly, it's offensive. Suddenly, it's different. You don't like it when the mirror is held up, do you?" Lindsay had nothing left. A nervous chuckle escaped her lips as she waved a dismissive hand. Okay, I get it. Let's move on." Trump leaned back in his chair. "Yeah, I thought so." And just like that, Lindsay Moore had lost control of the interview. The audience felt it. The crew felt it. And soon, the entire internet would feel it too. But the real explosion, that was about to happen. Online. It didn't take long. Minutes after the interview wrapped, clips of the exchange flooded social media. The moment Lindsay Moore asked her now infamous question, followed by Trump's unshaken takedown, it spread like wildfire. On X, formerly Twitter, one of the first viral posts read, "Lindsay Moore thought she was about to embarrass Trump. Instead, she got absolutely obliterated on live TV. This is brutal." The clip had already racked up over 3 million views within the first hour. Comment sections exploded. Imagine the outrage if someone called Michelle Obama outdated on national TV. Lindsay Moore just played herself. Trump didn't just defend Melania. He exposed the hypocrisy of these so-called feminists. This is exactly why the media has become a joke. They'll preach about women's rights, but the moment they get a chance to tear down a conservative woman, they take it without hesitation. The divide was instant. Conservatives praised Trump for standing up for his wife, flipping the script on Moore in a way no one saw coming. Meanwhile, liberals scrambled to spin the moment in her favor. Over on MSNBC, a commentator called the exchange an unnecessary outburst, accusing Trump of bullying a journalist. But that argument, it didn't land the way they'd hoped, because people weren't just talking about Trump's response. They were talking about Lindsay's question. Why did she think it was okay to frame Melania that way? Why did she assume women had an expiration date? The backlash against Moore was swift and relentless. By the next morning, headlines dominated the news cycle. Lindsay Moore under fire for disrespectful question about Melania Trump. The Washington Examiner. Did Lindsay Moore cross the line? The Daily Wire. Feminist hypocrisy. Host faces backlash for outdated remark. Fox News. And then, things got worse. Sponsors for Moore's show began feeling the heat. Emails flooded in. Viewers demanding to know whether they condoned ageism and double standards. Desperate to contain the damage, Moore took to Instagram, posting a carefully crafted statement. As a journalist, I ask tough questions. That's my job. I regret if my words were misinterpreted, but I stand by my right to challenge public figures. It didn't help, because no one was misinterpreting anything. They had all heard it, clear as day. And the internet? It wasn't done with her yet. The real fallout was only just beginning. By the next evening, Lindsay Moore's name was everywhere, but not in the way she had hoped. What started as an attempt to humiliate Trump had backfired spectacularly, turning her into the target of a backlash she never saw coming. Media watchdog groups called her out for blatant sexism and hypocrisy. One op-ed in the Wall Street Journal raised the question, how can a host who has spent years championing women's rights turn around and mock a woman based on her age? Even some liberal voices distanced themselves from her remarks. CNN's Jake Patters reluctantly admitted, "Look, I'm no fan of Trump, but this question wasn't journalism. It was a cheap shot, and he turned it around on her hard." Meanwhile, conservative news outlets had a field day. On Fox News, a panel dissected the moment frame by frame, calling it one of the most embarrassing cell phones in television history. And behind the scenes, Lindsay's employers were in full damage control mode. By the end of the week, a leaked memo revealed what everyone suspected. Network executives were furious. Publicly, they stood by Moore. Privately, they knew this was bad. Viewership for her show plummeted. Advertisers were hesitant. And the network, they weren't willing to take a hit for her. The following Monday, Lindsay opened her show with an apology, a forced, half-hearted attempt to calm the outrage. In the heat of the moment, I made a remark that was taken the wrong way. It was never my intention to offend or degrade anyone. I deeply respect Melania Trump, and I regret if my words were misinterpreted. It didn't work. Comments flooded in. Classic. The immediate go-to. A non-apology. Taken the wrong way. We all heard you loud and clear. You don't regret what you said. You regret that people caught your hypocrisy. So much for empowering women. By the end of the month, Lindsay Moore was suddenly on vacation. Some whispered it was a quiet suspension. Others speculated she was done for good. One thing was obvious. She had underestimated Trump. She thought she could land a punch and move on. But she had walked straight into a storm she wasn't prepared for. And the conversation? Far from over. The dust was still settling, but one thing had become crystal clear. This wasn't just about Lindsay Moore anymore. That interview had exposed something deeper. In the days that followed, the discussion stretched far beyond Trump, beyond Melania, beyond even Lindsay herself. That moment had ignited a bigger debate: media bias, double standards, and the way powerful women, especially conservative ones, were treated. Conservative commentators called it out immediately. If this were a liberal woman, the media would be screaming sexism. But because it's Melania, they laugh. Even some left-leaning voices admitted the question had been out of line. I don't like Trump, but there's something ugly about using a woman's age as an insult. We don't do that to men. And suddenly, this wasn't just about Melania Trump anymore. The conversation turned to Hillary Clinton, Kamala Harris, Michelle Obama, women in power who had all, at some point, been mocked for their looks, their age, their husbands. But here's where it got really interesting. The same people who had spent years calling out sexism and media bias, dead silent. Why? Because this time, the target was Melania. Trump's supporters saw right through it. They don't actually care about women. They care about controlling the conversation. And Lindsay Moore? She had just become the perfect example of what people were sick of: the media's selective outrage. How some women's dignity was worth defending, while others, fair game. And Trump? He didn't just defend his wife. He flipped the attack into a win. He forced the conversation into uncomfortable territory. People had to ask themselves, why is it suddenly okay to attack a conservative woman this way? Why do we let some jokes slide but not others? Why do feminists stay silent when it's a woman they don't like? And whether you agreed with Trump or not, the question stuck. This wasn't just a viral clip. This was a reckoning. And it wasn't going away. The clip didn't just make headlines. It became a turning point. Lindsay Moore's cheap shot at Melania Trump? It wasn't just embarrassing. It was a mirror, held up to the media's hypocrisy. Trump had done what few politicians ever managed to do. He didn't get defensive. He didn't lash out. He exposed the double standard, calmly, effectively, and people noticed. For weeks, the internet kept the debate alive. Was this just another example of bias in media? Would a liberal woman have been treated the same way? Why do some get protected, while others are fair game? And perhaps the biggest question of all, when did we decide a woman's worth had an expiration date? That last question, it stuck with people. Because at its core, this wasn't just about Trump. It wasn't just about Melania. And it wasn't even about Lindsay Moore. It was about respect. It was about the hypocrisy of the so-called empowerment movement that only protects women they agree with. And for many people watching, it was a wake-up call. Melania Trump was many things: a former model, a businesswoman, a first lady. But she was not outdated. She was not disposable. And no woman should be. The moment Lindsay Moore smirked, thinking she had landed her punchline, she had already lost. She had exposed herself. And Trump? He didn't just win the argument. He changed the conversation. What do you think? Should more people be calling out this kind of hypocrisy? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this.